Welcome to The Business. I'm Catherine Robinson. Coming up on the program, NAB profits snap back as business confidence hits an all-time high, but boss Ross McEwen warns it's too soon to wind back government stimulus.
It's far too early to back off because the big thing we'll look for is GDP growth and unemployment coming down.
And hot property, the real estate investment boom that's leaving Australian house prices for dead. Well, the National Australia Bank is the last of the big banks to hand down its half-year results. It's revealed a surge in statutory profits, up 144% to $3.2 billion in the half-year ending March 31. The bank has also declared a fully franked dividend of 60 cents per share. CEO Ross McEwen joined me earlier from the NAB headquarters in Melbourne to discuss the results. Ross McEwen, welcome to The Business.
Thank you for having me on the program.
Can you take me through the key drivers of this profit result?
Well, look, it was a very clean set of results for NAB. A profit of $3.3 billion, well up on this period last year, but a lot of that was to do with the write back of some of our provisioning that we made on impairments last year. And quite a different year this year that we're seeing already. The economy is certainly moving forward. We're expecting GDP growth of about 3.7%, where last year, this time we were seeing declines quite dramatic.
Well, Ross, on those provisions, $1.2 billion was put aside last year, $128 million has been unwound. When will more of this be unwound, and does the amount left in provisions guarantee profit for the next half?
Well, what we are doing is remaining on a very cautious footing because there are still ramifications of this pandemic in Australia. There are many of our business clients that are in the CBD that are still struggling. We've got some parts of tourism industry, travel, that are still having some difficulty. So we've remained on a very firm footing. And if the economy continues to grow, we'll reverse out some of those impairments over the next few years, but it'll be over the longer term rather than very short.
Ross, the economic landscape is extremely different today to this time last year. Banks were slashing dividends, putting money aside. In hindsight, were the measures taken too prudent? Was there too much capital set aside?
Well, look, as a bank, people expect me to keep a very safe organisation so I can support customers. And the fact that we went out as an organisation and took in more capital last year to make sure we were safe and nobody had to worry about us meant we could get in and support our customers. And time will tell whether it was too much, but I think it was the right thing to do at the time.
Net interest margins declined 4 basis points, Ross, putting pressure on the business banking division. Where's the squeeze coming from?
Look, it's a very competitive market here in Australia. As interest rates are very low, banks are making money out of lending money, and therefore it's competitive, not just for the big banks, the small, medium-sized banks and some of the digital banks are performing and competing very hard. The business market, which we are the largest bank in this marketplace, is competitive, but you will have noticed we've grown market share over the last 6 months, which is very pleasing. And we've put more bankers out dealing with customers, and it's showing results. But competition drives margin contraction, and that's what we're seeing and have been seeing for quite some time.
And how do you manage that, given low interest rates are expected to stay with us for some time?
Well, it's a matter of focusing on customers' needs, doing a great job for customers. Our whole strategy is around working with customers and having great colleagues working with them. It's a two-pronged approach. Doing good things with our colleagues as well. We've got major programs of training and development and qualification for them. And at the same time, just focusing on customer needs. And that's what we're seeing really driving business towards the NAB. And I expect that to continue. You saw good growth in our pipeline of customers wanting to do business. And we've certainly seen that continue into April. So it's strong demand based on customers feeling pretty good about what's going on in this country.
Well, on that pipeline, you've got a pipeline growing that you haven't seen for years. Just how big is it?
Well, just in the home lending market, we've had a 45% increase in the applications coming in to our personal division. And you've seen that, well over 40% increase in pipeline over the last 6 odd months in our business division. So But this is coming from a very confident marketplace. The surveys we're seeing from customers showing them the most confident about this economy than they have since our surveys were started 30 years ago. When people are confident, they do things, they're comfortable borrowing, comfortable growing their business, and that's what you're seeing in Australia and in New Zealand.
On to dividends now. You've announced an interim dividend of 60 cents per share. What do you project for future dividends? Are they here to stay?
Well, look, certainly we are a dividend-paying stock. We had to reduce our dividend last year because of what was happening in the economy. We've been able to double the dividend back up to 60 cents per share for this interim dividend. We've declared a range which we'll run our dividend in, and we're in a very strong position to keep that going. But it does rely on the economy staying strong.
Well, let's talk about the economy now. The National Australia Bank says the rebound has been better than expected, but you have an optimistic outlook, but risks remain. What is your economic outlook with respect to GDP, jobs and wages?
Well, it will be driven by GDP. We think by the end of this year we'll see the economy growing at 3.7% and about 2.4% next year, which is good. That will then translate into lower unemployment levels. We see that down close to 5%, 5.1% by the end of this year and into the 4s next year. The important feature is when you get into low 4% unemployment rates, you start to see wages lift. And that, I think, is going to be a really important feature to look out for. We haven't seen wages rise across the board in Australia for quite some time. And getting the unemployment levels down and people into work will be a good indicator of getting wages back up. As I've got around the country and many parts of it, Northern Territory, Northern Queensland, into the cities, the biggest thing I'm hearing from employers is we can't get labour. And that's the big thing at the moment, is how do we get the labour pools back into Australia? Traditionally, we've had a lot of immigration. Traditionally, we've had a lot of students and coming over on working visas. A lot of that stopped. So it's how quickly can we get that going so we can keep Australia moving.
And Ross, the Treasurer is handing down the budget next week. What do you want to see from the government with respect to incentives for businesses, stimulus, etc.?
I think the government is really stepping into it as they did last year to keep this economy going. It's far too early to back off because the big thing we'll look for is GDP growth and unemployment coming down, which means more people in jobs, and therefore the government gets the tax take, and that's what everybody will be looking for. So too early to back off yet, and look forward to seeing some of the packages coming out in the budget, and looking forward to seeing some of the just reduction in bureaucracy that has sort of been built up over decades, particularly for small businesses.
Ross McEwen, thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Well, there's been a huge protest vote against Rio Tinto nearly a year after the mining giant destroyed 64,000-year-old Aboriginal rock shelters at the Juukan Gorge. More than 60% of shareholders voted against the company's executive pay report, giving Rio Tinto a first strike. Traditional owners have welcomed the protest vote. Rachel Papazzoni was at the AGM.
Perhaps it was the masks or the state border controls, but Rio Tinto's AGM attracted a much smaller crowd than was anticipated. But the issues that have been plaguing the miner for the past year were front and centre. The company was quick to address its blasting of the Juukan Gorge in May last year, a historically significant site to the PKK people of Western Australia's Pilbara.
The rock shelters at Juukan Gorge should not have been touched. We are so sorry.
Despite former CEO J.S. Jarks losing his job over the blast, he walked away with an $11 million paycheck. Shareholders voiced their concerns at the remuneration policy that allowed that to happen and gave J.S. Jarks a 20% pay increase in his final year with the company.
I absolutely understand the sense of outrage that people feel at the remuneration settlements that have been made for the departing executives. We have significantly strengthened the discretion that the board is able to exercise in the malice and clawback provisions.
Executive bonuses will now take ESG performance into account, accounting for 15% of short-term bonuses. Shareholders also raised concerns about the company's plan to curb its carbon emissions and called for cuts to carbon emissions to hold a greater weight in determining bonuses. Rio Tinto affirmed its hope to restore part of the caves that were destroyed and told shareholders compensation talks with the PKK people remain confidential.
The work we have to do at Juukan Gorge is beyond the remediation of the site.
Having spent 4 months touring Australia in an effort to repair Rio Tinto's reputation, the new CEO will return to London this week. It's unknown when he'll be back in the country.
China's government today announced it's cut off all diplomatic contact with key officials of the Australian government under the China-Australia Strategic Economic Dialogue. The move comes after the Morrison government last month cancelled a Belt and Road agreement between China and the state of Victoria. And the China tensions, along with COVID jitters and new restrictions in Sydney, weighed on markets today. The All Ordinaries ending 0.5% lower. And the Aussie dollar is buying a bit over 77 US cents. Well, if you think house prices are soaring in Australia, listen to this. In the South Korean capital of Seoul, apartment prices rose more than a fifth last year. That's one of the fastest rates in the world. The boom is even being blamed for families choosing to have fewer children. Seoul correspondent Carrington Clark reports.
3-year-old son Park Jae has been entertained playing house, while his parents have spent months trying to buy a home in Seoul.
We had a price range in mind at the beginning, but as we searched, the prices just kept going up and up.
They've managed to find a place, but it means a long commute in a city plagued with traffic.
We have to move out of Seoul, and it'll take an hour and a half to get to work, which I'm not happy about.
Home values in South Korea's capital rose 22% last year. That's one of the fastest rates in the world. The average house price in Seoul is just over $1 million. Compare that to the most expensive capital city in Australia, Sydney, where the median home value is just over $950,000. Loans are cheap because of low interest rates, and experts worry a lot of people are speculating prices will rise, pushing them up even further, creating a bubble.
People have made really big profits in a very short time. This makes more investors and consumers want to jump into the real estate market.
Sky-high home prices are being blamed for one of the major societal issues facing South Korea today, its shrinking population. Last year, the country recorded the lowest fertility rate in the developed world, at just 0.84 expected babies for each woman. That's about half Australia's rate. Many families are reluctant to have more children while paying a huge mortgage.
My husband wants to have a second child, but I don't think it's possible considering how much we'll be paying back.
There's also now a major scandal hogging the headlines. Senior public servants are accused of using inside information to make big profits on land deals. At least 20 bureaucrats are being investigated. 2 have taken their own lives. The current president's approval ratings have crashed, and he's shown an inability to do anything to cool the housing boom.
This government has raised taxes, restricted loans and punished speculators to try to deal with prices.
The government is directly capping prices at some new developments like this one. But the developers say for each apartment available, there's 100 people who want to buy it.
The spots are fully booked and there is also a long waiting list in case someone cancels.
Former Brisbane resident Lee Jung-suk is entering the lottery but knows her chances of success are low.
Everybody wants to live in Seoul, but there is limited numbers of apartments.
The Parks are happy they've managed to secure their own place, even if it comes with a massive mortgage.
We decided to buy a house now because we think the house prices will just keep going up.
Taking the plunge now, as it might be out of reach for the next generation.
And that is all from The Business. I'm Catherine Robinson. Thanks for your company. Good night.